tell you we appreciate your time to sit down with us and talk about your career here at the Ross Fire Department. And I would like to start with just tell us when and where you were born.
I was born in San Francisco, 1957, January, and have basically been part of the community since I was 4 years old.
And you're in the town of Ross?
In the town of Ross.
Your whole life is here, okay?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your family, your folks, your background, your parents' background, your grandparents, and how far back you would like to go.
On my mother's side, we go back about 5 generations in California. On my father's side, we go back 4. My parents, my mother, I should say, was a Nave, the Fairfax Naves, and my father spent his entire life in San Rafael. Okay. So my father was an engineer for Pacific Telephone, and my mother was an RN. And always made time for their kids, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are they enjoying their retirement? I assume they were. I mean,
both my parents have passed in the last 3 years.
Okay.
So both succumbed to cancer.
Yeah. Tell us about your school days.
Starting when, Bill?
Starting from K through master's degree, whatever.
Okay. K through 8 was right here in the town of Ross. I went to the Ross School. 71, I went to Redwood High School.
Oh, okay.
75, I went to UC Berkeley and graduated in 79 and a half. And then after a lot of years, starting in 99, I went back and got my master's in public administration from University of San Francisco.
Oh.
So I did go.
Okay, what did you graduate from Berkeley with?
I had a degree in biology and environmental studies, which really had nothing to do with what I ended up doing, but that's at the time what I did.
You were kind of ahead of the curve a little bit.
I was thinking about going into getting an environmental law degree, and a couple turns in the road, and I didn't do that.
So, but you have a master's degree.
I do have a master's degree.
Has that served you well, you think?
I think it was very good for me. The USF program was more about being a manager and knowing the law, and actually my thesis in that program was on, actually at the time this was still public safety, and is a community better served by a public safety department than a fire department? And the analysis included Santa Clara and Sunnyvale and Roanoke Park, and a lot of field work, but it showed not only in ISO ratings, but in training hours and all kinds of service delivery things that the true fire department does a better job.
Yeah. At one time, the town of Ross attempted a public safety program. Mm-hmm. Was that did you include that in your thesis, or? I
did use town of Ross, so obviously my interest was based on that, and I was able obviously to retrieve that information real easily.
Right.
And that's why I went outside to the other agencies to really test my thesis and see if it was true or not.
So in your opinion, for example, Roanoke Park, does the system work based on?
It works, it provides the coverage, but even over the course of time, they've used a totally different approach to delivering it. They now staff their firehouses full-time. They don't count on the police officers going and getting the fire engines. And that was a result of fire after fire where outside agencies were beating them there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's true, right? That's good. And University of San Francisco, you got your master's degree. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. When did you join the fire service? There's a story that when you were 17, you wanted to be a volunteer here in Ross. Tell us that story about it.
Yeah, I was 17. It was about September, maybe October, and John Racco was already a volunteer here, and he lived across the street from me up on Winship Avenue, and he said, why don't you come down and be a volunteer? On occasion, they've let people in at 17, Bruce Selfridge being one that they let in, I think, at 16. So I came down, and John had told me to ask for Tom Casson, the fire chief, and I came down, and it was pretty quiet, and nobody seemed to be around, and I went back to the shop, which is right next door to where we're sitting now. And I see these 2 feet sticking out from underneath the rig, and I said, "Chief Casson?" And he says, "Yeah, I'll be up in a minute." And he starts sliding out on the creeper, and here come his knees, seemed like another second or two, here's his hips, and I finally realized this guy is one tall guy. And he comes out, and I told him I was interested in being a volunteer, and very gruffly he says, "You 18?" And I said, "No, I won't be 18 for a few months." And so he says, "Come back in a few months," and he just, on the creeper, back underneath he goes. So January of 1975, I came down and made a formal application, and I've been around ever since.
Okay.
7 years as a volunteer and 30 years as a paid man.
Wow.
So,
Were you ever a sleeper?
we were known to sleep here quite a bit.
Okay.
It was a little different atmosphere in those days. As the programs did evolve, Bruce and I were covering Tom Casson towards the end. He had a heart issue, so we were working side by side with him on a shift to make sure everything was okay. But we had a full sleeper program at that point.
And when you joined the fire service, the work schedule was what? The work day was?
When I first joined, we worked 48 hours on and 48 hours off. It was just the 2 paid staff. And as the retirements came, both Tom Casson and Herman Koolhoven and Bruce and I took over. It was back-to-back 48s until 1986. So about 4.5, 5 years we worked that schedule. And in that schedule was, when we both got married, we were both in each other's weddings, and to get a honeymoon was damn near impossible.
Yeah.
But we worked some 10-day straight shifts so that things could happen.
Yeah. I would assume you partook in the College of Marine Fire Tech program?
I took several classes there early on, all the way to Betancourt's maintenance classes, and I believe I took 1 or 2 from you, and several instructors down there.
When you came on board here, was the paramedic program here at the station?
Paramedics started in October of '83, so it was a few years after. I started in '81,
Right.
And I left for a year. I wasn't sure the fire business was for me. I went and built running tracks and tennis courts all over the world. And in September of '83, I ended up coming back to cover Herman Koolhoven, who whispered to me, "I'm not coming back." So anyway, long story short, here I am.
Okay.
And it's been straight through since then.
So that story is that he asked you to come back and fill in to him for a couple of weeks. That was the plan,
That is,
right?
yes. He was off for some minor surgery, but he gave me the heads up that this was also his retirement.
Okay. So in a sort, you guys were basically the chiefs on duty 48
Correct.
hours at a time.
Correct, yeah.
When did you get relief on that kind of schedule? How did that come about?
In 1986, we got the 3rd captain. We had a very active sleeper program. They encouraged the kids going to college from Marin, come in and spend the night. So in 1986, we were serving as captains because of the public safety chief being the chief. 86 was the 3rd captain, and that program stayed there probably for 6 or 7 years. It stayed with just the 3 captains, the sleepers, and then we finally got a seasonal program going, and we pretty much had 2 people on duty starting in about 96.
So right now you have 3 captains on duty working 48, 96, I take it?
Yes, right now is
Right. 48.
captain, engineer, apprentice firefighter,
Okay.
24/7.
You're about to retire, and as you leave the town of Ross Fire Department, it no longer will be the town of Ross Fire Department. It's going to be joined with the Ross Valley Fire Department. Tell us about the history of going about getting this merger done.
Well, there's a ton of history. I'll zip through the old part.
Yeah.
There was attempts all the way back to about '83. Rick Mollenkoff I think it was 83, 84, made an offer to the town. That didn't work out, and there was multiple starts on and off over the years. Ross Valley again, a Kentfield attempt, a 5-way attempt to do the whole valley that a lot of money was spent on studies and never worked out, and then an attempt with Larkspur. About 2 years ago, I started talking with Roger Meager next door, and the timing was right. I was leaving. None of my guys wanted to be chief, and we put ourselves, we got a lot of things in place before we approached anybody. And then we fast-tracked this really in the last year, and especially in the last 6 months, to get it through the political parties that be. And here we are, July 1, leaving it in very capable hands next door.
Yeah. So the process, you had to go to four different political entities to get this done?
Correct, multiple times.
Multiple times.
Yes. To sell the idea initially, we developed a working group, and that included members of all the agencies. So we knew we had a few votes on board before we got to the political parties. But yeah, we ended up before the councils twice, and in my case, multiple times to get it through.
And Rescue 40 is going to remain in the town, in this facility?
You're dating yourself, Bill. It's
I
Medic 18 now.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah.
yes.
18.
Nothing here in the town of Ross will change.
Okay.
The town elected to continue to pay for the apprentice program, so that's a separate charge within the JPA. And so to the citizenry, it'll all appear the same.
When did you become chief?
August of 2008, I was in Butte County on the fires when I got a phone call, and they had decided they were breaking away from the public safety concept after about 25 years, a little over 25 years, and Police Chief Rice was promoted up, and so was I in August of 2008.
Okay. So when you became chief, your manpower was what?
My staffing was 3-0.
3.
Yeah.
So you
I had initiated that apprentice program in 2006, and it actually morphed out of a seasonal program that we had for a couple of years prior to that.
Yeah.
I was able to fund it in 2006 and go forward.
So were you the relief person if a captain was sick or went on vacation?
No.
You hired back?
We hired back and everything.
All right.
Yeah.
That's good. So when you leave in July, you'll have how many years in service?
37.
37.
Yeah, 37 started in January.
Yeah. So you started as a volunteer at 18, you became a paid man at what age?
26 or so, right in there.
Oh.
So, yeah, 25, 26.
Tell me a little bit about when you were going around the world installing, what you were installing what?
Running tracks mostly worldwide. Tennis courts some places, but spent a good deal of time in Venezuela developing a running track for the supposed Pan Am Games that never was used, but we were there doing it for the government of Venezuela. And that was quite an adventure.
Yeah.
Went down a couple times on that track. We did a lot of stuff in Western Canada, and there was multiple trips to the Far East.
Wow. The company that you're working for was located where?
San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
And there was a company called Malott and Peterson Grundy that
And
had
you-
developed and held the patents to a lot of the materials, so they were the only game in town. And
So your connection with them was,
a good friend of mine that I went to school with was one of their salesmen, and that's how I got in there.
okay.
And I knew after a year, yeah, the traveling was great, but was
Yeah, yeah. Tell us a little bit about your family, your immediate family now.
my immediate family. My wife Tammy I've been married to for 28 years. I have a daughter Amanda who's just about to turn 26, who is the communications manager and runs the dispatch center for Pro Transport Ambulance, headquartered in Roanoke, or Cotati actually, but she's in charge of 145 ambulances a day.
Now, when you were a a volunteer here, what other odd jobs did you have? Did you work for any other companies that we might know of?
Well, there was this one guy who pestered me for a while, Dan White.
Yeah,
Was known to build an ambulance or two in this backyard, actually, and I delivered medical gases for him, worked across the street at the Art and Garden Center, doing odds and ends, and whatever I could find on the side. You know.
it's kind of funny because both our careers parallel the same thing, because I worked for John Raggio just before the Dan White era, getting bottles over at Gilman and bringing them over here. So
Exactly.
we have a little bit in common.
Yeah.
So how was it to work for Dan White? He's a fair man? He's gonna-
Dan was an awesome guy
he's
to work
gonna
for.
edit this out, yeah.
You know, it was an eye-opening experience for me because I was a Marin County kid, and all of a sudden I'm delivering to the projects in Oakland and rest homes in the East Bay that were like nothing I'd ever seen. So it was a good experience. You know, he was fair. He didn't pay much, but he was fair.
Well, yeah. Yes, Dan. Let's get back to Marin County. Tell us about your association with the Marin County Fire Chiefs and how they're doing.
I went through the operations section, all the officers there in the mid-'90s, was in the prevention section on and off for years, and obviously when I was made chief, well, you know how it works.
Yeah.
The newest guy in becomes the secretary,
Right.
so I went through the chairs at the chief's level, and that's actually, when I had my first department-wide meeting in January of 2009, I suggested to my troops, because they were very much on the merger track in their brains, that there might be some good opportunity coming out of that. And we actually at the chief's level have had a lot of discussions and a lot of actions on sharing different things and look at different programs from maintenance to actual mergers. So my prediction came a little bit true, and here we are.
Yeah. The station we're in right now, the front of the station was built when?
It was finished in 1932. All the original facade is the same. What we're sitting in now was built in 1995.
Tell us how that came about, this extension that we're in this 3-bay.
3 engines ago, we were able to create an engine small enough to still fit in the front bays, albeit tight, it fit in there. And due to DOT regulations and everything else, engines kept getting bigger and bigger, and we had nowhere to put it. So they threw a cocktail party in town and raised a great deal of money. There was a contractor in town who volunteered a lot of labor and built this section we're in right now out of community funds.
No taxation, just
No
volunteer.
taxation. No.
You should be quite proud of that. This is quite an addition to the station. I mean,
You know the history here,
yeah, that's
so.
true. It's
yeah,
great, yeah.
yeah.
Tell us what you believe was your greatest challenge as a fire chief, coming from a very small town like Ross, very protective of its name and so forth. What's it like to be the fire chief here?
It's very political. Although this town's changed a great deal from when I grew up in it, it's a community that's very involved, knows the decisions you're making. They're very aware of what's going on in their community. So initially when we talked merger, there was a few comments, not a lot, because I think we did a much better education of the people this time around. We had a lot of public workshops and presentations, and we got it through. But I think a lot of the big players in town, and I don't mean anything by that, are friends of mine. And I think a little pre-education did a lot this time around. But the community has changed in like the early 80s when they tried it. It was the community that went up in arms and wouldn't allow it to happen. And this time we got labor involved early and the community involved so that they knew what it is. And being a slightly different community than it used to be, there wasn't the chatter. But there was definitely some eyes watching me and Roger and what we were doing.
Going on, okay. So, were there some nay votes for the merger? I mean, all the four entities, the political entities, were there some, did they all pass, they all passed, I assume, had to be?
They all passed unanimously except for in our own town. There was one abstention because of an item in the JPA contract that he thought needed to be clarified. He wasn't against the merger, very much behind the merger, but he abstained to do that. But otherwise, we had unanimous.
Wow, very good.
Yeah.
That's quite an effort on both chiefs' part on that. As you know, the cam siren was developed and manufactured here in Ross.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any history on that, or as a kid growing up here in town, aware of it?
Aware of it to the point where I knew where it was, up in 18 Canyon on the barn. It was a very quiet operation. You know, they were building nozzles, shut-offs, and mostly sirens.
Yeah.
And, you know, until they remodeled that here just a few years ago, the original shop was still in that building downstairs. And, you know, I became obviously more aware of it when I got here and saw the cam sirens on engines with Ross nameplates on them.
Yeah. He lived in town, didn't he, I think? The
I think he did.
engineer who developed it.
I think he did, yes.
So-
Yeah, I never knew him.
Yeah, good
So,
story.
yeah.
Yeah, it moved to Santa Rosa nozzles, and then it kind of
Right.
lost in Sacramento
Right.
someplace, yeah.
And ended up finally, I believe, with Federal Signal or something.
Is that
was-
what- yeah,
the
what-
final
yeah.
buyout was.
As a fire chief, what's your greatest concern?
In this community, fire loss. I mean, one residence could be as much fire loss as an entire community over the hills fire loss for a year.
Yeah. You have, what would you say is your high priority fire loss, potential fire loss here in town? You have no industry, to speak, light industry.
Right.
But what would you say would be your number one concern if, you know?
Life safety, we used to have the Cedar School up there, which was a real rat trap, but it's since been rebuilt and is real state-of-the-art. My concern in this community is not only how big the homes are, but the contents. I mean, there's a lot of incredible artwork.
Yes.
Like I say, some of these houses, just the fire loss in a single house due to what's in there could
Right.
be,
Sure.
yeah.
Great, would be great, yeah. That's good.
You know, and this, you know, the whole wildland interface here is,
You do it.
you know, eventually
Yeah,
going to be
yeah, it's the one.
horrific, but, you know, we do our best to keep it
Yep.
clear.
Good water supply, I take it? Yeah.
Mostly,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Tell us about some of your professional organizations and associations you've been with and joined.
Over the years, like I said, all of them are in county, different things. I did a lot of different work early on trying to keep my fire ratings, so I was ICBO rated.
Which
and,
is what now?
The International Conference of Building Officials. Early on, that was one of the things I kept
Okay,
trying.
so your rating right now, the town of Ross's rating is,
ISO rating?
right, yeah,
4.
okay.
It went from 5 to a 10 in 1982. They got that rating back to a high 5 in the end of 1982, and I got it down to a 4.
What drove it to a 10? That's like rural America.
At the time, it was, well, once again, that's when the public safety concept started.
Oh, okay.
Chief Casson just didn't believe that ISO could come in and push you around, and they came in and rated the town 9 and 10. He was a strong personality,
Wow.
and that's why it was so easy to get it back to a 5. It was basically a headbutt between the inspector and Tom
Oh,
Casson.
wow.
So
Oh, 10 though, that's,
yeah,
that
that's
inspector.
no real true water supply or
No.
anything. So it was a slam.
Okay.
But, and I don't think in the rating schedules it ever actually changed to that because the town immediately challenged it.
Oh, okay.
But that's kind of what precipitated all the rest, the public safety concept and everything else.
So you belong to the chiefs, you belong to any other associations, statewide, nationally?
International fire chiefs, Not too much. A couple school organizations, USF alumni, Berkeley alumni.
Oh, yes, that's right too, Berkeley alumni.
Yeah.
You see, go Cal.
Yeah, I'm kind of a diehard Cal fan.
Yeah, I bet you are. I have a son-in-law, so also graduate of Cal. It gets crazy after a while.
Yeah.
In your career, what are some of the significant changes you've observed from that day you walked in to become a volunteer to July 1st?
I think the biggest is the change from how the fire service delivered its service. When I started, it was one guy got the engine there, and you hoped a bunch of volunteers showed up. The communities were different. There was a lot of community spirit for those volunteers. When I first started, there were 30 or 35 volunteers. As time went on, it kind of, it just dropped off as people found their way to other things. But I also think the change in how the community sees the fire service is quite a bit different. When you had those volunteers, you had actual community members knowing exactly what was going on. I think our level of professionalism has just gone through the roof. I mean, in those days, it seemed like if there was fire in a building, there was a good chance it was going to be a fire, and a big fire. And now I think we're at a level where, hopefully room and contents is as far as it goes. And I think we deliver that service very well. In my career, mutual aid in this county, it's always been critical, but I think we couldn't deliver the service at all if there wasn't the mutual aid that the fire chiefs had built.
So you're leaving the citizens in good hands, you think, as of July 1st?
Oh, yeah. I've told people that kind of question the whole thing, I wouldn't have undertaken this and done this if I didn't think it was the best thing.
In your career, did you have a mentor that took you under his wing? Because when you came in, it was a handshake, and then I'm leaving in 2 weeks, kind of. Mm-hmm. But did you have someone that you could fall back on when things got a little rough early in the career?
I fell back a bunch on Tom Casson. Mm-hmm. I think that's where I got a little bit of my pig-headedness from on certain issues. But he was always common sense, and there was always a way to do it, and there was always another way to do it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you get up against whatever it might be, I'd go back, and he was living in San Benicio at the time, and I'd visit him and say, what was your experience 10 years ago? And, what do you think? Yeah. And he was a good one. There's several chiefs right now that helped me immensely. When I knew him because I was running it as a captain, but when I became a chief, it's really a different thing.
So good camaraderie in the fire service.
Very much so.
Very much, yeah.
I think in this county especially. This county, Ronnie Coleman comes here, he can't believe, he likes to come here and he likes to be part of our group because we listen to him and sometimes we actually make change. Yeah. So it's a good group.
It is. It's a very unique county. I mean, I think, even starting with the Woodacre, Marin County Fire Department not being CAL FIRE.
Uh-huh.
That's quite a significant thing.
Right.
Because I remember many times they want CAL FIRE to come in here.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't impart wisdom to a new fire chief, but if you had the opportunity to impart to the new chief who's going to take it over, what would you tell him?
First thing I'd say, know your community, know what's going on, don't be looking the wrong way because you never know where it's coming from, and then be good to your troops.
Yeah. Speaking of that, did you, being a small town, did you ever have a union situation where you had to deal with union people in Ross, or was it all the chief took care of
the fire department guys have been a member of 1775 since probably, I would think, 88 or so. Okay. And there have been some headbuttings. Mm-hmm. Part of the problem with having it when it was public safety department is you didn't have a fire chief's perspective. You had a police chief's perspective. And so a lot of times information wasn't given to the council that needed to get to the council. It was, you're working both sides against the middle, and the middle's being controlled by the other side. So there was times when, there was some labor issues, and once they split again and split the associations, there were still some labor issues, but they were worked through.
Yeah. I would imagine during this merger, labor was, both sides were very concerned with protecting their turf. or
Very
at
much.
first.
I think 6 months will tell, just like the first time when Fairfax, Sleepy Hollow, and San Anselmo went together. They're coming around. There was some contention. The Ross guys were making more, had better medical benefits, and also drew a bunch of overtime because we're on a must-staff station. So we've gotten through that. It was a challenge, and the guys actually were made whole for 18 months if the tax measure had passed,
Okay,
which it didn't.
okay.
So that was a contract that they signed up for and now working within.
Well, yeah, well, time will tell, I guess, right?
Oh, I think it'll work.
It'll work, yeah.
The iron fist over there of Roger Meager, it'll work.
If you had the opportunity to change anything in the fire service, statewide, countywide, townwide, nation, what would it be?
I think probably the whole pension issue at this point is something that, I don't know quite how you would change it, but how the public sees the fire business right now. The perception is, I think we don't do a good job as a fire agency and a fire business as a whole, selling what we do and why we get paid what we get paid. And I think that's we're doing a disservice to ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, the pension issue is not going to go away for a while, I don't think.
No.
It's going to be started soon. So what are your plans to do as of July 2nd?
July 2nd, I'm going to take 6 months and decompress. This has been a wild ride for the last couple of years trying to get all this together. I've got a few irons in the fire. There's some nonprofit stuff that I'm looking at. I've been approached by a couple consultants, one to actually consult against the town on a project that's been going on since 1984.
Wow.
And I told them I wasn't interested in that. But there's a couple other people that have approached me, and multiple people in town have approached me with.
To good jobs?
Yeah.
Well, good. I
So
mean,
I'd like to work 2-3 days a week because I'm not a guy to sit on my hands.
yeah.
If it got more than that, I'll evaluate as I go. But
Good.
for 6 months, I'm going to do nothing, Bill.
Any hobbies or anything like that? That you,
I like to play golf.
Okay.
And I like to boat and water ski.
your
Although I
hand-
just
your
sold my boat. What
your
kind of
hand-
retired guy retires and sells his boat?
Your handicap is?
When I'm playing a lot, probably about a 12. Right now, it's probably about a 20.
Oh, okay, so you get
Because
time to work
I
on
got
that.
plenty of time and to work on it, yeah.
So you got anything you would like to add, talk about that I didn't bring up or something like that for your career at the town?
I'd like to first thank you guys for doing this, because without this, we're going to lose a whole lot of information. And the way it's going, the chiefs are getting younger and younger, and they're not staying put.
Yeah.
You're getting bodies that don't know history, don't know what's been going on. And thank you guys for doing this. And as far as
Yeah.
chiefly things, I enjoyed every minute of this, and the challenge of putting this whole merger together was,
So you truly know when they say time flies, you know what it means.
yep, like we talked about earlier, 37 years ago. I can't even believe it's 37 years, so,
It's incredible.
yeah.
Well, we thank you for your time, Chief.
You bet.
We wish you and your family the best.
I'll just butt in for 1 minute, Bill.
Yep.
I always do it.
Yes?
Okay. If magically you could rewind the clock, would you do it all over again?
Like I tell my friends from Berkeley that I graduated with, they all became brokers and all well-to-do.
Yeah.
And they used to ask me that same question. I used to tell them, it's not about the dough, Joe. It's about doing what you want to do and loving it. Now, these guys aren't loving their careers so much anymore, and I wouldn't change a thing, not one thing.